It's T, it's your girl Purple Dog, and I'm collabing with Quality Control Music for JT City Cinderella concert this week in Birmingham. Y'all got y'all tickets because I will be in the building.
At 21 years old, Gennia Grimes wasn't trying to figure life out. She already had a plan, a baby boy she adored, her whole world wrapped into one small life she was determined to protect, provide for, and build a future around. And she wasn't slowing down because of it, she was moving faster. College, classes, responsibilities, all of it balanced on her shoulders, and somehow she carried it with purpose. She was studying criminal justice, already thinking ahead, already seeing herself walking into a courtroom one day, finishing the degree she had started, with her graduation set in her sights, August 2025. Her mother always said it from the beginning. She was a superstar, and Gennia believed it too, not in a loud way, but in the way she showed up. Because when she walked into a room, you noticed. On stage, she became someone else entirely. A dancer with the Honeybeez team. Confident, sharp, alive. Online, people knew her as Purple Doll. The same girl whose dance video had gone viral back in high school, proof that she had something rare. And somehow, she managed it all. Motherhood, school, her dreams, never dropping one for the other. She was building a life that had direction, structure, meaning. And everything about it pointed to one thing: she knew exactly where she was going. Until something changed everything. This is her story. Before we get into this, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or country in the comments. I always check. And if you follow true crime stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a case. Gennia Grimes was building a life that was just beginning to take shape. She was 21 years old, raised in Southwest Atlanta, and from the start, people around her noticed something different about her. Not just talent, but presence. The kind that made people turn their heads when she walked into a room. She didn't need to demand attention. It followed her naturally. She was expressive, confident, and creative in a way that felt effortless. Music and movement weren't just hobbies to her. They were part of how she existed. In high school, she became known for her performances, especially dance. One routine in particular spread quickly online, gaining attention beyond her immediate circle. For most people, that kind of moment fades. For Gennia, it stayed with her. It reinforced what she already believed, that she had something worth showing the world. She even gave herself stage names, Strawberry and Purple Doll. They weren't just playful identities, they reflected how she saw herself. Bold, vibrant, unforgettable. But there was more to her than performance. When she enrolled at Alabama State University, she chose to study criminal justice. Her goal wasn't vague. She wanted to become a lawyer. She wanted to understand the system, be part of it, and use it to help people. It wasn't just ambition, it was direction. And even with everything she had going on, she didn't slow down. She joined the Honeybeez dance team, a group known for high-energy performances and discipline. It was competitive, demanding, but she fit right in, balancing rehearsals, classes, and everything else in her life. Because by then, her life had already changed in a major way. Gennia was a mother. She had a baby boy, just months old. And instead of stepping away from her goals, she leaned into them even more. Being a mother didn't stop her. It sharpened her focus. She was going to school, raising her child, chasing a career, and still holding on to the part of herself that loved to perform. That kind of balance isn't easy, but to the people around her, she made it look possible. She carried herself with energy, with purpose, like someone who knew exactly where she was headed, even if she hadn't fully arrived yet. But real life isn't just made of those moments. Outside of the stage, outside of school, outside of the image people saw, there were responsibilities, pressures, relationships, and sometimes, the weight of all of that doesn't show on the surface. Because even when someone looks like they have everything together, even when they're pushing forward, chasing goals, showing up every day, there can be something else happening quietly, something not everyone sees. And in Gennia's life, behind all that energy, all that drive, something was starting to shift. Somewhere between her classes, rehearsals, and the responsibility of raising a young child, there was a relationship. Rogers McLeod Jr. He wasn't a stranger in her life. He was someone close, someone she trusted enough to spend time with, to travel with, to let into her world during a period when everything around her was already demanding so much. Two young people, connected, navigating life together. They shared moments, conversations, time on the road, like so many couples trying to figure things out in real time. And at first, it likely felt normal, comfortable even. But life wasn't simple for Gennia anymore. She wasn't just a student. She wasn't just chasing a dream. She was a mother. And that changes everything. It introduces responsibility that doesn't wait. Gennia was focused. She had direction, school, goals, her child, her future. She was pushing herself to stay on track, even when it wasn't easy. But in relationships, that kind of focus can sometimes create imbalance. Because when one person is building, growing, evolving, it can expose insecurities in the other. And also the reality of age. They were young, still figuring out who they were individually, while also trying to exist together. And when you add responsibility, expectations, and emotional pressure into that mix, it doesn't always create stability. Because on March 27, 2025, they were together, in a car, on the road, just the two of them. And something in that space shifted that would change everything. March 27, 2025. It was supposed to be just another drive. Nothing about it, from the outside, would have stood out. A car moving along Highway 80 East, two people inside. Gennia was heading back toward campus. She had responsibilities waiting. Classes, commitments, a routine she had been trying to stay consistent with despite everything on her plate. Inside the car, it was just the two of them. The kind of quiet that comes with long drives, occasional conversation, moments of silence that don't feel uncomfortable. At least not right away. There was a shift, subtle at first. Whatever is happening stays inside that confined space, growing heavier with every passing mile. The conversation, whatever it was, didn't settle, it didn't resolve. Instead, it tightened. Words may have become sharper or fewer. Silence may have started to carry more weight than anything being said. And in moments like that, emotion can change quickly. What starts as tension can turn into frustration. Frustration can turn into anger. And anger doesn't always stay contained. We don't know every word that was exchanged. We don't know exactly what triggered that moment. But we do know this: whatever had been building didn't stay controlled. At some point during that drive, a gun was introduced into the situation, and that changes everything instantly. Because once a weapon enters a moment of tension, the outcome is no longer just emotional. It becomes irreversible. What exactly triggered it? Was it something said, a reaction, a buildup that had been growing long before that day? That part isn't fully clear. But what is clear is that whatever happened in that moment ended with a gun being fired. And everything after that was no longer about an argument, it was about survival. Because when that shot rang out, it happened in an instant. 1 second there was tension inside the car, words, silence, whatever had been building between them. And then, a gunshot. Loud, sudden, final. Everything after that slowed down. Gennia's body shifted in the passenger seat. The movement wasn't dramatic, it was subtle, a change in posture, a loss of strength. Her energy, everything that had defined her, suddenly replaced by stillness. But she wasn't gone. Not yet. Her breathing was uneven, shallow, struggling, still a chance. And in moments like this, there's usually one instinct that takes over. Call for help, react, move, do something. Because every second matters. But that's not what happened. Instead, there was hesitation. Not panic in the way you would expect. Not urgency. Not immediate action. Just a pause. Gennia remained in that seat, her body trying to hold on, her breathing still present, but fragile. And with every passing second, the situation became more serious. What should have happened was clear. A phone call, a voice asking for emergency assistance, an attempt to save her life. But inside that car, instead of immediate action, something else took priority. Something that didn't match the urgency of the situation. Something that didn't match what anyone would expect. And it's that part would leave investigators questioning not just what happened, but why it happened the way it did. Because instead of reaching for emergency assistance, he reached for his phone. Not to dial 911. To open the camera. The screen lit up, framing the scene in front of him. Her body, her condition, the reality of what had just happened, captured through a lens instead of being addressed in real time. And he started recording. There was no urgency in that decision. No attempt to check her condition in a way that showed panic or desperation to save her. That's what makes this moment difficult to process. And then, he stopped filming. The phone stayed in his hand, but still. No call to 911. Instead, he searched for a contact, scrolled, paused, and then placed a call. He called his mom instead, saying, "Something just happened." That call happened while Gennia was still alive, while her condition was critical, while time was still something that could have worked in her favor. But in that moment, the first call wasn't to emergency services, it wasn't to get immediate medical help, it was to his mother. And that choice is what changed everything. The question that follows is unavoidable. Why? Why record? Why not call for help immediately? Why take those extra moments that could have been used to try and save her? Investigators would later focus heavily on that behavior because it didn't align with panic. It didn't align with someone acting purely on instinct in a crisis. Instead, it raised deeper questions about intent, about what was going through his mind in those critical minutes. Because when someone is injured and still alive, the priority is clear. Every second counts. Every delay matters. And here, there was a delay, from filming, to calling someone else first, to eventually reaching out for help. And by the time that help was finally called, the situation had already moved beyond what it could have been. At this point, what do you think was going through his mind? Do you believe this was panic in the moment, or something else entirely? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read through them, and I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this. Once the immediate crisis passed, the case entered a different phase. The focus was no longer just on the shooting itself. Now the question became, what exactly happened inside that car? Because from the beginning, the explanation tied to Gennia's death did not sit cleanly against the facts investigators were uncovering. The account given by the person with her in those final moments, Rogers McLeod Jr., did not fully match the physical reality of the scene or the evidence recovered afterward. His version, according to investigators, was that Gennia became emotional during the drive, reached for a gun, and shot herself. On its face, that explanation attempted to frame the shooting as self-inflicted. But very quickly, that narrative started to weaken, because investigators were not only looking at statements, they were looking at timing, at the condition of the scene, at what was and was not visible, at what had been captured on a phone in the minutes after the shooting. Authorities found images and videos that, instead of supporting his explanation, raised more questions. One image reportedly showed Gennia bleeding inside the car, but with no gun visible. Because if the claim was that she had shot herself, investigators expected the physical scene to reflect that account more clearly. According to testimony, another video showed a gun being placed on her body after the shooting. That detail changed the direction of the case in a major way. Because once investigators believed the scene may have been altered, this was no longer just about a disputed version of events. It became about whether a false story was being created after the fact. And that is where suspicion started to grow rapidly. This wasn't just a matter of someone describing a traumatic moment poorly. It was the possibility that the evidence itself had captured actions inconsistent with panic and more consistent with staging. First, there was the shooting. Then, instead of an immediate 911 call, there was filming. Then, a call to his mother. Then, phone evidence suggesting the gun may not have been in the position his story required. When investigators laid those details next to each other, the timeline became harder and harder to ignore. And timelines matter in cases like this, not just because they show what happened, but because they show what someone chose to do when every second counted. If someone is acting out of shock, there may be confusion, delayed speech, disorganized actions. But when actions begin to suggest adjustment, placement, or an attempt to shape how the scene appears, investigators start asking a very different question. Not was he overwhelmed, but was he trying to make this look like something it wasn't? Because once doubt enters the room, every detail is re-examined. And in this case, the more the evidence was examined, the less his version appeared to hold. That is what pushed the case away from the idea of suicide and toward homicide. On April 4, 2025, Rogers McLeod Jr. was arrested and charged with capital murder in connection with Gennia Grimes' death. That arrest changed the public understanding of the case. What may have started, for some, as confusion around a shooting inside a car had now become something much more direct. Authorities were saying this young woman had been killed, and they believed the person responsible was the man who had been with her. Officials were blunt in how they described it. They identified the case as one involving domestic violence and said Gennia was an innocent young woman killed by her boyfriend. And for the people who loved Gennia, no arrest could undo what had been taken. She was 21, a student, a dancer, a young mother, a woman with plans that were still in motion. Her son was still a baby, too young to understand the loss that had already shaped the rest of his life. He would grow up hearing about her through stories, photos, memories, and the grief of those who knew what she had hoped to become. That is one of the hardest parts of this case. Not just that she died, but that so much of her life was unfinished. The law degree she wanted to pursue, the career she was working toward, the life she was trying to build for herself and her child, all of it was cut short. And in the aftermath, what remained was heartbreak. Family members forced to mourn not only who Gennia was, but everything she still should have had the chance to be. There's a part of this story that goes beyond what happened in that car. Because cases like this don't begin in a single moment. They build, sometimes in ways that are almost impossible to notice from the outside. Gennia's life, on the surface, looked full. She was in school, she had goals, she was raising a child, she was still showing up, still moving forward, still holding everything together. And that's what makes this harder to process. Because nothing about her life suggested that it would end like this. That's the reality of hidden tension in relationships. It doesn't always show itself clearly. It doesn't always come with obvious warning signs that everyone can see. Sometimes it exists in small moments, conversations that don't sit right, emotions that feel heavier than they should, reactions that don't match the situation. And when those moments are repeated over time, they can build into something much bigger, especially in young relationships. Because at that stage, people are still learning who they are. Still figuring out how to handle pressure, responsibility, and emotion. And when you add real-life weight, like parenthood, expectations, and uncertainty about the future, it can intensify everything. What might have once been manageable becomes overwhelming. And when someone doesn't know how to process that pressure, it can come out in ways that are unpredictable. That's one of the key lessons here. Not every relationship that looks stable actually is. Not every connection that seems normal is healthy beneath the surface. And sometimes the most dangerous situations are the ones that don't look dangerous at all. Because when everything appears fine, there's less reason to question it. Less reason to step back. Less reason to ask, is something wrong here? That's why reflection matters. Because stories like this force us to ask difficult questions. How well do we really know the people closest to us? Not just who they are on good days, but how they handle stress, conflict, pressure. Because those are the moments that reveal the most. And another question that comes up. What signs do we ignore because we want things to work? Because sometimes people sense when something isn't right, but they push it aside. They give it time. They hope it will change. And in many cases, it does. But in some cases, it doesn't. And those are the ones that carry consequences. There's also another critical part of this case that can't be ignored. The delay. Because after the shooting, Gennia was still alive. There was still time to act. And in situations like that, immediate response matters more than anything else. Calling for help isn't optional. It's urgent. Every second can make a difference. And when that response is delayed, even briefly, the outcome can change. That's not just part of this case. That's something that applies to any emergency situation. The moment something goes wrong, the priority has to be clear. Get help. Immediately. Because hesitation can cost everything. It all comes back to that car. That moment. That space where everything changed. Gennia was sitting in the passenger seat, still alive, still breathing, her body trying to hold on. Even after everything that had just happened. And inside that car, there was a window of time. A moment where the outcome hadn't fully been decided yet. Where action, immediate, urgent action, could have changed what came next. But that moment passed. Not because help wasn't possible, but because it didn't come when it should have. Instead, there was silence, recording, a call that wasn't to emergency services, and time kept moving forward, until it ran out. When you step back and look at her life, that's what makes this even more difficult to accept. Because she wasn't at the end of her story, she was in the middle of it. A student working toward something meaningful, a young woman building a future, a mother raising a child who depended on her. Her life wasn't slowing down. It was just beginning to take shape. And now, everything she was working toward exists only in what could have been. Her son will grow up without her presence, without her guidance, without the chance to experience the life she was trying to create for both of them. And that's the part that stays with you. Not just how it happened, but what was lost. If this story moved you, take a moment to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. It truly helps these stories reach more people. And if you feel this case deserves more awareness, share this video with someone else. Also, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think things could have turned out differently if help had been called immediately? Let's talk about it in the comments.